There are some new developments to tell you about in the Aaron Hernandez murder trial. A friend of the football star is being arraigned in a Massachusetts courtroom today. Ernest Wallace is charged as an accessory to the murder after the fact. Police say he was there the night that Odin Lloyd was killed back in June, but then hightailed it to Florida. Wallace and one other man are being charged alongside Hernandez, who's being held without bond. But with three suspects, how does the prosecution try to nail down its case? Mercedes Colwyn is a Fox News legal analyst, and Brian Claypool is a defense attorney. Brian, let me start with you. And let me just pose that question to you. When you have three suspects, how does the prosecution prove who pulled the trigger that night?
Well, Allison, right now it's a game of chicken because we know that all three of those gentlemen were over there at the scene of the murder. So my argument would be that optimally the prosecution would want to know who pulled the trigger. But even if they can't prove that, there could be a conspiracy to commit murder. One of these three is gonna come out and tell us the truth about an agreement that was put together to kill Odin Lloyd, and all three of them then would be guilty of murder by conspiring to do so. But in terms of the immunity issue, Allison, I would not grant any immunity right now to Ernest Wallace. It's too early. We don't know exactly what evidence the prosecution has. For example, if they have some forensic or physical evidence that ties Aaron Hernandez to the shooting, then why would you want to cut an immunity deal right now?
But
that should be a measure of last resort.
But Mercedes, they are charging him with a much lesser charge than they are Aaron Hernandez. I mean, accessory to murder after the fact, it sounds like they want to go after Aaron Hernandez. He's the big fish, it sounds like. The prosecutors want, and these other guys, Carlos Ortiz and Ernest Wallace, that they might try to rely on them to testify against him. Is that how you read it?
You're exactly right, Allison. What the prosecution is doing is that they're looking at this very strategically. They're saying to themselves, we're going to take the weakest link here because your defense is only as strong as your weakest link. We're going to target Wallace. We're going to say to Wallace, listen, you can spend up to 7 years in jail. We're going to cut a deal with you. Otherwise, we're going to lump you in with the other suspects, and we are going to go, as Brian said, for that conspiracy charge, and then you'll spend 25 years to life in prison. It's your choice, your gamble, but we're on it, and we've got film, we've got footage, and someone's going to say something, and my guess is Wallace is the one that's going to speak up.
Brian, they also have a text message that Odin Lloyd sent really just minutes before police think that he was killed. Let me read that to you. It says he sent this text message where he sent it to his sister. Did you see who I am with? He says. His sister writes back, who? Odin says NFL. And then he writes, just so you know. That sounds like he thinks that Aaron Hernandez was going to do him some harm.
Well, absolutely. That text message is just what I'm talking about, Allison. If you have any evidence at all, even if it's circumstantial like this, that supports a motive for Aaron Hernandez to kill Odin Lloyd, don't cut a deal with any of these other guys, Wallace and Ortiz, because eventually they're going to come clean and implicate Hernandez. That text message, it tells me he's worried about his safety, and I've even done that in my career. I've told a friend, hey, if something happens to me, I want you to look at so-and-so. So that is very damaging. And Allison, here's the home run. Who has the motive of these three gentlemen to kill Odin Lloyd? Who has the motive? It has to be Aaron Hernandez. Why would Wallace or Ortiz have any motive to do this?
Can't, though, Mercedes, Hernandez's attorneys just say, look, you have these two other witnesses. They are unsavory characters. They have criminal records. Clearly, they're just trying to protect their own skin by testifying against him. One of them is guilty.
That's a great point. I mean, that's how they're going to introduce, the defense will introduce that as sort of bias and to undermine the credibility of those witnesses. Whenever you have a witness, 9 times out of 10, their criminal history comes into play, especially if it's recent criminal history. And apparently these individuals do have recent criminal histories. They'll come into play. It'll diminish their credibility. And they're going to talk about the motives behind it. They're cutting a deal. Their involvement was much greater than it was. That's the type of exposure that the defense is going to flesh out during trial in order to undermine them.
Brian, you talked about a motive. You think that Aaron Hernandez is the only one with it. What is his motive?
Well, I thought I read something about he was jealous of Odin Lloyd. There was some kind of conflict that led up to this years prior to that. Maybe it involved a female, but maybe it was a competitive kind of thing because Odin Lloyd played semi-pro football as well. But look, if you measure Hernandez versus Wallace and Ortiz, Wallace and Ortiz have no connection at all with Odin Lloyd. That's very important. And also, I think an important point, Allison, is Carlos Ortiz has already come forward and said that he saw Aaron Hernandez with a larger gun after the murder took place, and Odin Lloyd was killed with a Glock 45, with a Glock 45, which is a larger gun. So that's another piece of evidence that I think will help the prosecution, and it'll obviate the need for the prosecution to cut immunity deals.
Mercedes, very quickly,
Ortiz.
last,
Sure.
there have been some reports that that Aaron Hernandez was involved with drugs, may even have been a drug addict. Is that a mitigating factor? Does a judge ever have sympathy if somebody says that they were a drug addict?
That's a good point. I mean, it may come into mitigation at the end. It's certainly not going to be an issue at all whether there's criminal liability afoot, because it doesn't sound like the defense is going to go there at all. The defense is really talking about you have the wrong person that you're charging. They're not talking about somehow some emotional impairment. But in terms of mitigation, in terms of sentencing, that's when that type of issue will come to play.
It's an interesting case. Mercedes Cohen and Brian Claypool, thanks so much for all your expertise.
Thanks, Allison.
Great to see you.